Well, the formation of a state bank is again taking center stage. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni said this week that the Deputy Finance Minister, David Mason, would soon take the state bank plan to Cabinet. David Masondo, that is, to Cabinet, and National Treasury says that it's opposed to changing the Pension Funds Act to allow members to access a portion of their savings before retirement as a guarantee for a loan. We're joined now by the Deputy Director General of Treasury, Ismail Momoniat. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. Firstly, let's just talk about how far these plans for a state bank are then.
Hi, good evening, and to your viewers. I'll leave it as what the Minister said, that the Deputy Minister has been working on it and will be taking the matter to Cabinet. I mean, there are issues that need to be taken into account. I think just generally, it's obviously one thing to have an idea, but to actually develop a more detailed proposal does require further work. And I know that that's what the Deputy Minister has been doing and leading that process. But let me leave it to the Deputy Minister at some point to come back to you on that.
So the work that lies ahead, as you said, is quite an enormous task, but also is technical. So realistically, even if the ball gets rolling now, how long do you think it could be before we actually see the state bank fully functional and operational?
Look, there are many state banks that are already in existence. I think the issue is how do you, for example, consolidate some of them so that you have those that actually deliver on whatever objectives government has. And when you look at a state bank, there's many different types of banks. One needs to look at what problem are we trying to solve? What market are we trying to solve? And all of that needs to be taken into account. So yes, it can take some time. And, banks are based on trust and require injections of capital. And, I always say, certainly from the 2008 global financial crisis, banks are almost like nuclear facilities. If you don't handle them with care, they may explode and you can have an even bigger liability. So there is a lot that needs to go behind it. And I think identifying the exact market failures you're trying to deal with is a challenge.
In terms of the current existing entities which are being looked at, you talked about consolidation. In terms of being consolidated then as part of the state bank, speak to me about the options that you're exploring there. There's been the suggestion of potentially dissolving something like a post bank, looking at the land bank, the Industrial Development Corporation as well.
Yeah, look, I really don't want to get into the matter because I think it does require sensitive discussions. And that's why the minister has said the Deputy Minister will be taking some proposals to Cabinet. And depending on that outcome, one will come up with a product to put forward. But I think all I'm trying to signal is that these are difficult discussions and does require quite a lot of technical work. And hence the reason why it's taken a bit of time.
And of course, we also had recently Treasury coming out very clearly, and this is against the call for it to support the borrowing. This is of members, at least, who are part of the Pension Funds Act, borrowing against some of their savings.
Yes. Look, that is a private member's bill brought by Honorable John George, who's an MP from the Democratic Alliance. And as a private member's bill, it goes through a different process. It doesn't go through what we call a socio-economic impact study. And so I think our issues are not related to whether there should be some limited withdrawals allowed against savings that people make for their pension funds. But to have them to a very limited extent, because the idea, I mean, you have a retirement fund to save for retirement. It doesn't make sense if you say that you can then withdraw all of that well before retirement. You also enjoy a tax concession to save towards retirement. And the reality is that all over the world, we as human beings don't think about the long term. We get driven by the expenses we have today, this week, this month, this year. So, and that's why government offers a tax deduction to encourage you to save. So to the extent that you have withdrawals, they must be very limited, and we need to close the loopholes that don't allow preservation. And that's the biggest problem we have, that one, we don't have enough people who save for their retirement, so it's a question of coverage. Two, when people save, they tend to withdraw, and they use the loopholes on preservation. They resign from their jobs, they then spend their money, and then they end up with very little when they retire. So those are the bigger problems. It's retirement reform, which has been something we've been doing since 2011. And what we wanted to say to Parliament is be mindful of the big reforms. And we are working on that. And the problem is complex. This bill doesn't really deal with the operational details of how it's going to work. And if you're not careful, it can decimate the savings industry. It doesn't deal with very difficult technical issues around it. And at the end of the day, it may defeat the very purpose that we have, that you want people to save for retirement. So how it's structured, we've said it needs to go to that sort of socio-economic impact study. It needs to provide operational details, and that it really requires so much work that we're saying it's probably easier to withdraw that bill and to give the department more time. We are working through this in NADLAC, and yes, we would all want to get a solution sooner rather than later, but it does require a bit of work.
And I think that's really at the nub of the issue, right? Because even when we look at the calls for a state bank and the expediting of those plans to be brought forward, or even this issue around the Pension Funds Act, it's really about the fact that there are many South Africans currently who find themselves in incredibly difficult situations, and yet the current financial system doesn't seem to be understanding of that lived reality, especially in a post-COVID world.
Yes, look, I think that the COVID has introduced new challenges throughout the world. And whether it's dealing with inequality, whether it's dealing with whether people have savings, and if they've lost their jobs, what do they do? They've lost their income, and so on. But, even before COVID, you've had problems where many South African households are quite overly indebted. And in a sense, South African households don't save at all. And in fact, we only save up to 2% of GDP. And to the extent that households save, it's largely because of these what's called contractual savings, or what you forced to save for your pension. So you work and your employer deducts, and you don't even know it, okay? So that's why we really save. Now, we got to therefore not do something which discourages that saving. And bear in mind that savings is not only important for the individual when they retire, but is also important from a macroeconomic perspective, because those are the funds that are available for investment and to ensure higher growth and so on. So for all these reasons, we say, if you look at the savings industry and what we allow for retirement funds, it does need that impact assessment. And having a bill in Parliament with no impact assessment, I think, can actually undermine both the individual savings and the macroeconomic objectives that we have.
All right. The Deputy Director General at the Treasury, Ismail Momoniat, let me thank you so much for your time tonight.